Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Recovery and Resiliency Principles and Practices training with Mary Jadwisiak. This is a live training that was filmed on May 26, 2010 in Vancouver, Washington. If you'd like information about other trainings and services offered by Mary Jadwisiak, please visit our website at www.matac.net. This is a 4-module training and you are watching Module 3. In this module, we will continue our discussion of the components of recovery, particularly hope, strengths-based, and responsibility.
So, we're back. Now, if you remember correctly, we've been going through the 11 components of recovery, right? We've talked about holistic, we've talked about individualized and person-centered, we've talked about self-direction, we've talked about empowerment and non-linear. So, and then we had some examples of all of that where we talked about, we read the story of Jim and looked at what were Jim's internal barriers that he had and what were some of the external barriers that the system had towards Jim's recovery. We talked about that. And then we heard the panel, which was where people brought their experiences and we could see in real life what these components looked like and what the role they played in each of these 3 women's lives in getting well. And then now we're back. And so now we're going to talk about what I think is probably one of the most important pieces to this whole thing. And it's like the fulcrum. It's like the turning point. It's like the one thing that you got to have for everything else to even be relevant, and that is hope. So when we talk about hope, we're not talking about the kind of hope like, dear God, I hope today's not the day I have to do a UA. Right? We're not talking about the kind of hope, well, maybe, but I'm not talking about the kind of hope that is a religious experience or that has a religious connotation but what I am talking about is my definition of hope, which is very simply the realistic expectation that things can get better. Now, there was a time in my life when I hated hope. I was a mom, I had my own issues. I refer to, right? I don't have a mental illness anymore. I just have issues. I've got a lot of them, but I had issues at that point in time. I had a child who consequently had his issues because I had my issues. And I kept looking for that one thing that was going to fix our family. I kept looking for that one thing that was just going to do it, that was going to, just like a magic wand. And I thought that was hope. And what happened was every time I would get optimistic about something, it was paired with this sense of despair that would come over me, this visceral pain of despair that would come over me. And I realized that there was a really good reason why hope was in Pandora's box with all those other horrible, nasty things, is because it was in itself a horrible, nasty thing. And that was just the experiential learning that I had, and that was the decision that I came up with. And so I just decided that hope was not the thing I wanted to have. But what happened was that was not a realistic expectation. What I had was fantasy world hope, not true hope. What I was looking at was somebody to come along and fix me, to somebody to come along and fix all our problems. And the truth is I probably wouldn't have accepted it anyway. But I wanted to have that magic kingdom where everything was fine, when I didn't even really know what fine was going to look like. What I came to realize is that hope is just simply that, realistic expectation that things can get better. There's no promises attached to it that they will. There's no promises attached to it that it's going to be easy. There's no promises attached that it's going to work the way you thought it would. But things can get different and things can get better. So what happened in my life was, I'll tell you a little bit about my life, was I went through a period of time where I was seeing a lot of therapists and I just couldn't figure out what in God's name was wrong with me. And I decided that I was an alcoholic, and I probably was. I'm sure I was. And so I went to AA, and that fixed a whole lot of stuff. And then I realized, gosh, maybe I'm depressed, and I probably was. And so I went to see psychiatrists, and I went to see counselors, and I wanted to be a better parent, and I took a lot of classes, and I did a lot of things, and I just never quite felt right or connected, and none of it ever really did what I needed it to do. I never felt whole. I never felt like this is it. But I kept going and I kept working. I always was able to hold down a job, not always for a really long period of time, but I was always able to hold down a job. I was always able to make the mortgage and at least put some food on the table. with a little help from the bank of Dad. And finally, I came to, I had a job, and I got a new boss at this job. And have you ever been to one of those strategic planning things for a board, right, where you all sit around and talk about the future, and there's a process and a facilitator, and now I do that. But at the time, I guess I went, you know how there's always that one person who kind of undermines and sabotages the whole process? So that was me. And the next day, my boss just kind of walked into my office and said, you know, I don't really care what is wrong with you. You need to fix it. I don't really care what your diagnosis is. You don't get to act like that. So there was a part of me that was horrified, because remember we talked about the humiliation of when you know you're not acting properly, but you just can't stop yourself and you can't figure out what's going on. So that's what happened to me. So I had this boss. Now, at the time, I had my AA sponsor sent me to an energy healer. She's like, you know what? You've done a whole lot of other work. How about we try this? So I went to this woman who did healing touch. And it's kind of like Reiki. It's energy work based on the chakras, based on Eastern medicine. And she started working on the various systems in my body. And she got to the adrenal system. And I began to pretty much vibrate off the table. And she said to me, honey, have you ever known any trauma? And I was like, well, do the first 20 years count? And she's like, yes. So we identified that there was some trauma going on. At which point, she sent me to her acupuncturist, who also was very good with trauma. Now, two things happened with these individuals. The first one was when I was filling out the intake form. Remember I told you how traumatic intakes can be? So she had this intake form, and she wanted to know what my issues were, and I put human condition NOS. And so, and for those of you who are not clinically minded, that just means not otherwise specified. And so then we started talking about stuff, and I was like, you know what, I don't really want to talk about this. I've talked about it a lot. I've really come to a lot of terms with the issues that may have created this trauma. And so, I really don't want to relive that whole part of my life. That's not an option. I just want to get well. And she said something that was completely shocking to me. She was like, okay. Because, I really, really wanted somebody to go, well, that's not going to happen. So that I could be like, well, then never mind. So when she did that, it forced me to begin to look at myself differently and to take some personal responsibility for stuff. So I went to the acupuncturist, and I told him just enough to make him realize that, in fact, this was the accurate diagnosis. And they listen to your pulse. It's very interesting. They feel your pulse and then can kind of figure out where you need the needles to go. And so I said the same thing to him. I just want to get well. And he was very confused because he couldn't understand why else would I be there. Right? Because to him, getting well was the point. And so that was a whole new approach. And I remember saying to the healing touch therapist was, gosh, I'm almost kind of afraid to get well. What's going to happen if I'm really well? I don't have any excuses for being inappropriate anymore, right? I don't have any excuses. I got to be the best I can be. If I'm going to be well, I got to be like everybody else. Holy smokes, that's a little overwhelming. So we went through this whole process, and one of the things we identified were some dietary stuff, so I stopped eating potatoes, which, in case you don't know, it's in everything. And that made a huge difference. I cannot even tell you how, between the energy work, the acupuncture, and no potatoes, I am a completely different person standing in front of you. I can't describe it. I can only tell you that it's the truth. And anybody who knew me before and who knows me now can be a testament to say, yeah, it's true. So what happened to that was that I began to realize that but let's go back to that boss who sent me on this journey, because quite frankly, I really respected this man. And I really wanted to be successful in his eyes. I wanted to be successful in that job, and I wanted to maintain his respect. And so there's a couple things. He did not say to me, I know that you have issues, so you don't need to come to those that executive team meetings anymore. You don't need to deal with the board and do all that kind of stuff. You just stay in your office and run your program, and that's all. He didn't say that. He expected me to step up and participate. He had hope for me. And he also didn't say, yeah, you know, we knew when we hired you that you had a mental illness, and apparently that's not working out. So you need to go. He didn't say that either, right? He expected me to fix it. He had hope. So when his hope impacted my life, I began to look at my life differently and realize that there was a reasonable expectation that I could be different, that I could be better, that my life could be better. And that's how hope became something better than just that bug that came out of Pandora's box. But in fact, realistic expectation for me that things could get better. The way that it fit in my life was what worked for me. The way that other people's hope fits in their life works for them. But we can hold the hope for each other. We cannot hold the responsibility for each other. Right? I can't take responsibility for you. I can, but there's a 12-step program for that too. Believe me, I know. Right? We can try to take responsibility for other people. We can try to help other people find their self-determination. The one thing we can hold for each other is hope. We can hold the hope, and we can tell them, I have hope that you're going to get better. I have hope. I have a reasonable expectation that your life is going to improve. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I know it's going to happen. We can say that, and we can be true. We're not lying. We're not making it up. You can tell when somebody's faking it, right? Like, God, you look really great. And you're like, I do not. Right? I do not. But thanks for saying it. But we know that. But when someone says to me, I have the hope that your life can be different, that your life can be better, I believe that. And that's the one thing that we can do for each other. Regardless of our educational background, regardless of what relationship we have with these people, if you are the bus driver, you can hold the hope for the students on your bus that they're going to get better. And you can give them the information that they need. And you can tell them that you'll hold their hope for them until they're ready to take it on for themselves. It's a really powerful thing, hope. It's the turning point. It's when we know that things can get better, because otherwise, why bother? It's hard work. This is really hard work. It's emotional. It's sad. You know, Terry talked about grieving the loss of the life she could have had. But that was not where she stopped. She moved on. She embraced the hope. Things can be better. I know they can. I've seen it. It's not what I thought it was going to be, but it's still better than what it was. That's why hope is probably one of the most important things that we can have as a value. But it leads to one of the most important skills that we can develop, which is optimistic thinking. Right? Being a positive person. When I first moved to Washington State, I was pregnant. I was 23 years old. I'd never even known a pregnant person before. And my sister, who took me in, had never known a pregnant person before either. We've talked about it since, like, holy cow, I can't believe that baby is 30 and alive. Right? How did that happen? Don't know. Right? But he is, and it's wonderful, and it's all good. But what happened was, as I moved in with my sister, I began to realize by her she changed my life. Because when I would say something negative, which was always the first thing that came out of my mouth, she would say something positive. I would be like, I cannot stand this rain another second. And she would say, I love the green. She would never say, Mary, you are so negative. You've got to knock it off. I can't stand your negativity. She would never say that. She would just point out to me the positive. And with that modeling and that help, she taught me how to be an optimistic person. And I was able to teach that with my son, right? So kind of the rule in our house was if you say something negative, you have to say 3 positive things. And you can imagine for a 13-year-old that was kind of tough, right? So, but it was just one of those things that we just try to have to be positive, because what you focus on grows. We know that as parents, right? What you focus on grows. That's what the whole I call it the woo-woo movement, but like the visualizations and your vision boards and all of the things that we create, all the spiritual axioms and the meditation and the visualization, because your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between the truth and the reality and all of that, right? All of those things that are out there, all of those teachers that are out there, it's based on the premise that what you focus on is what's going to grow. That if you can conceive it, you can achieve it. If you can see it, you can get it. All of those things. That's what optimistic thinking is. It's really simple. Just believe in the best, expect things to get better, and find the silver lining, and your life becomes different. It's probably one of the most powerful things that you can learn if you want to make some changes in your life. So I'm telling you this, and if you have a mental illness, you're thinking, yeah, but I was told that I would never work again. I was told not to have any more kids. I was told I was told never to get married, that I can't have a relationship. I was told that I would never be able to finish college, that my dreams are done. So why would I be optimistic? Because we have to choose to step away from learned helplessness. And that's one of those things that happens when you step into a system that is designed to take care of you. They really want to take care of you. Right? They really want to be the ones to take care of you. And so we learn how to become very helpless. I call it the Jerry Springer syndrome. Right? Stay home, take your medicine, don't get stressed out, because if your symptoms get out of control, we don't have the power or the money or the time to fix it. And so the best you can hope for is to stay home and watch Jerry Springer. Right? And that's what we hear. That's what we're learned. That's what we're told. As people with mental illness, that's the best you can hope for. And we accept that. And we become dependent on that system. We have payees that work for the mental health system. We get paid to be sick. We get reduced fare bus passes. We get food stamps. We get reduced heat costs. We get paid to be sick. So when you talk to a person who has a mental illness and you say, would you like to go back to work? The very first thing they're going to say is, but I can't lose my benefits. Because they think in terms of, I'm not capable, I'm not powerful, I'm not enough. And then I refer to the woman whose son was in Western State Hospital in the forensics for, he was sentenced there for quite a while. And he was there for quite a while. And he's out now and he's making like $60,000 a year working as a computer guy somewhere. Right? So we have to move beyond these preconceived notions that we have for ourselves and the preconceived notions that other people have for us, and that we can become more than just our illness and more than just whatever deficit we have. We can step beyond it. We can step around it. We can step aside it. But truthfully, the only way out is through. We got to go through the middle of it. And one way to do that is to move from learned helplessness to learned optimism. Because what we know is that hope and health are connected. How we think affects how we feel. The optimistic outlook that we have, people that are optimistic, studies have shown, are less likely to be sick. And if they do get sick, they're less likely to stay sick. I think one of the reasons that I was able to maintain my life is because nobody ever told me that I was sick. Now, that was just a lucky happenstance, right? Because had I landed in front of a psychiatrist in my 20s, I probably would have been hospitalized. Had I landed in front of a psychiatrist in my 30s, I would have been misdiagnosed as bipolar. Instead, I got the diagnosis of the PTSD, and it's the lens that I can look through all of those years of therapy, all of those years of struggle, all of those years of trying to figure out what is going on with me, and it all falls into place when I looked at it through that lens. But without that lens, it's just a big giant fragment. So I'm grateful that nobody ever told me that I was sick, because first of all, they would have told me that I had the wrong thing, But the labels the label has such a huge double-edged sword. On one hand, you got to get the right label in order to get the right treatment. On the other hand, the label can just become a brand on your soul that never goes away. One of the worst things I ever did as a mom, and at the time I thought it was the best thing, was to get my son on Social Security disability. It did something to him internally that made him feel broken and made him feel inadequate. And I'm a mom, and we struggled financially, and in my head I'm like, yeah, kid's going to have health insurance, he's going to be covered, he's going to be good, right? Well, in his mind, it was like, I'm disabled? I thought I was just a little rowdy, So I remember having a conversation with him outside of the Social Security office. He was homeless. It was not a good time in his life. It was not a good time in our lives. And I remember we went into the Social Security office to talk about who was going to be the payee. We walked out, and I was standing in front of it, and I'm like, I got to fix this somehow. I got to fix this. So I started yelling at him. I was like, you know, you're not disabled. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Because this was years after he'd received the label, and I was starting to see the error of my ways. As an advocate mom, it's really hard to know when to stop, because that's your job. So I'm yelling at him. And finally, I was talking, and then finally I started yelling, and then finally I was just like, you are not disabled! And I'm like, and he says, well, I know I'm not like Uncle Joe, who was my brother who's developmentally delayed. And I was like, no, you're fine! I did it for the money! Just as his payee came out of the door, right? And I'm screaming, I did it for the money! So I had to somehow break through that pain that he carried. And if it meant throwing myself under the bus and being a bad mom, I did it for the money, I'd rather him think that about me than that he's disabled. So don't tell him. Those of you who know him or may know him some way, just let him think I did it for the money. And he has grown up to be an extraordinary human being who has mad skills and has everything he needs to be successful. But I just have to keep reminding him of that. And I just have to keep reminding him of that. So hope and health is really important because it gives each of us a key role in giving ourselves and our friends or our clients the information they have to go on. And each one of us can inoculate ourselves and each other with hope and optimism. Because without that, why bother? If everything's going to be the same, why bother? Now, part of thinking differently is talking differently. So much of what we do, because, social service, we talk a lot. And we're predominantly women, we talk a lot, And we're in a cocoon of our peers, and we have our own language. And that language can really be pejorative sometimes. And you don't even really realize what's happening because you've been in it for so long. And then we also have our own black humor, right? We have our own stuff that we do to blow off steam. But what's really important is that we respect our clients not just to their face, but in all aspects. When we're talking about them, when we're talking to them, when we're charting about them, when we're being supervised around them, when we're handing them off to the next therapist, when we're meeting with other professionals in the community, we have to be respectful because we're carrying their hope, even if they're not around. So if you're talking bad about a client to another professional in another arena, like you're the housing person and you're talking to the probation person, we have to maintain that respectful level at all times, because if we don't, they won't. And if we don't, the client knows. Even if they don't hear you, they're not there, they can feel it. Well, when somebody's been talking bad about you and you walk in the room, it's just there. It's in the room. It permeates the room. If you're in the break room making jokes about your clients, they know, right? They sense that. It may not be obvious, but it absolutely impacts your perception of them as humans and your perception of them as whether or not they can get well. And if you don't think they can get well, they're going to know that too. So it's really important as we move forward that we use person-first language, right? There's no such thing as a schizophrenic. Let's just get that out right now. There are people who experience schizophrenia. If we use person-first language, it doesn't really matter what their diagnosis is. So it's a person with. It's really easy to remember person-first language. You put the word person first, right? It's a person with schizophrenia. It's a person with a broken leg. It's a person with a camera. It's a person with whatever disability you may happen to have walking through the world. So when we use that kind of language, it makes us stop and think. It makes us stop and be, oh, that's right, this is a person who's experiencing this. And if I can approach that person, then chances are the healing can begin a little it's also really important that when you give somebody, really interesting things happen when you give somebody the authority for their life back, right? When someone comes to you and says, you know, things are a little disturbed for me. The people here talked about when they went for help and what happened and what that was like. And when you do that and you go for help and you recognize I need some help, and the help that you get is good, right? I know exactly what you need. Here's what we're going to do. That's one approach, and that can be an effective approach. And another approach is, here are some options. Which one do you think is good? Which one of these fits best into your life? Which one of these is gonna sit with you? Which one of these is the easiest, do you think, that you could accomplish? So that we include the person in the decision-making process. We partner with the person that's having the symptoms. We partner with them to develop the solutions. We let them lead. We let them take authority. We give them their life back, right? The authority and the responsibility for that back. Now, it's really one of the things on this slide that I think is important to talk about, and that is staff boundaries. We talk about boundaries. And a lot of times, boundaries are critical for healing. That's one of those things that's really important as a professional person, is that you understand where those boundaries are and that we don't cross them. And I am not saying here that you should start dating your clients or you should start selling them stuff. That's not what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is that you should consider, are you using that boundary, that professional boundary that is there to keep everybody safe? Are you using that to keep people away? Because you can still maintain a safe boundary and have a meaningful connection. And it's hard and it's exhausting. And if you're doing it 30 years, day after day after day, you may get a little callous and those boundaries may get a little higher, and you may be like, you know, what was the favorite question a therapist has ever asked me? What does the perfect world look like for you, Mary? Right? I mean, and I guess it's one of those questions that therapists use to help you visualize a good future. But at the time, I just thought it was hysterical. So, you know, I just think that we need to really think about and just consider your boundaries. Are they there to keep the client safe, or are they there to keep you safe? That's kind of what it's all about. Or both, right? We don't want too much of either, but is it a permeable boundary where the air can breathe back and forth, the respect and the love can go back and forth through that boundary? Or is it just a solid rock wall and we just kind of talk to each other over the top? The other part about respect that I think is really important is self-stigma. The internal messages that we give ourselves and the internal messages that we accept, and that whole sense of victimization around our illness. That I can't do this, I need somebody to take care of me. I've been traumatized, I have issues, I can't do that. I choose not to do that. I'm not going there. I've done that, right? I've done that with a therapist, like, oh no, I'm not going there. Please, don't even bring that up. So, that's just my own fear and my own self-stigma that's paralyzing me, that somehow I feel like I can't handle it, that I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, that my illness is really what's in charge of my life. That's that internal self-stigma talk that we have, that we all have. I mean, everybody has that. That's just part of being alive. But when you have a mental illness and you've got people in white coats with stethoscopes telling you that your life is never going to be the same again, and maybe you're strapped down to a table when they tell you that, you tend to believe it, right? That gets really internalized. So really looking at those internal messages and turning that around and going, yeah, okay, let's just set that aside for now and not decide if it's true or not, but let's really look at what is true. I love to paint, and so I'm going to do that. And I'm just going to start painting. Or I love to mow the lawn, and so I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to mow my neighbor's lawn too. And I'm going to mow, and maybe they'll pay me. And then next thing you know, you're in business for yourself, and you got a booming lawn business, right? But if we can just kind of set aside some of those internal beliefs we have about ourselves and go with what we love, and go with what we're good at, it's an amazing strengths-based thing. But the other piece is that we forget to ask for help. Because we think we're supposed to do it all ourselves, like, I can do this, or we think that we have to let somebody else do it all for us. But we forget that the truth is somewhere in the middle, that we can do it and people can help us, so we can get some support we need. And I think Terry's conversation today, her message today on the panel was about the support that she got from the community members, where they were willing to kind of step back from their rigid, this is the paperwork has to have this check mark X'd. And they were willing to say, oh, wow, you're doing really well. Let's see how we can help you. So it was a combination of her taking responsibility and them giving her a break, and she was able to ask for help and she was able to get it. And now she works for that company. And the thing also is that it's talking neutral, the language, self-respect, respectful language is just feels really uncomfortable at first. And it's really important that when we speak, we practice with it for a while. Because what we say isn't neutral. When you speak it, it comes into being in one way or another. So we have to practice speaking in a positive way, or just not saying anything. That old adage, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. The older I get, the more powerful that becomes for me, right? I can say nothing at all and really do it nicely now. I used to be like, right, still saying quite a bit. But now I can say nothing at all and just kind of not say anything. Or when I do speak, I can really, really speak in a way that my words bring legitimacy and distinction to what needs to be seen and what needs to be validated. All right, so this is a wonderful saying. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. And watch your character, because it will become your destiny. And I want to say a little bit here about neural pathways, because it's my latest adventure. My latest adventure in healing is neural pathways, right? We have these ruts, these highways that on our brains, and taking going off-road can be a little bumpy. But if we can create new neural pathways, it's so powerful. It's really amazing. So doing things differently and speaking differently is one way to begin that whole off-road journey. All right. I want to talk a little bit about strengths-based, and I touched on that, where we talked about what is it that you do well. And that's hard. Sometimes we have to ask other people, what is it that I do well? What am I good at? I don't know what I'm good at. I've just been so broken for so long, or I've been so isolated for so long, I don't even know what I'm good at anymore. And other people can tell you what you're good at. But when we focus on valuing and building on our capacities rather than our deficits, our life can really take a different turn. When we're able to look at what's good as opposed to what's bad, it's way different. But here's the problem, is that Medicaid doesn't reimburse for good stuff, right? You don't have billing codes for, she's really good at motivational speaking. There's no billing code for that. Medicaid is designed to help people and with issues that are medically necessary and appropriate. That's kind of the buzzword around that. So when we look at how are we paying for this, we have to get a little creative. And thank God things are moving in that direction. But when we're in a medical system or we're in a helping system, we got to identify what is it that's wrong before we can move into how can we help it. And sometimes we get stuck there, because that's always the easy part. Quite frankly, that's the easy part, is identifying what's wrong. That's glaringly obvious, usually. But what do we do well is a little bit more subtler. It's a little bit more quieter. And it's just a little bit harder to see. So if you think of it in terms of a symphony, right? You've got all these instruments. Well, the drums are always going to be banging, really loud. And our job is to make sure the violins come forward. Our job is to make sure that those violins are heard. And the drums are still there, but maybe they get a little quieter, maybe they turn into bongos. and the violins are the ones that are leading the show. We want to find those strengths, because if you can find those strengths, you can build on them. If you think about that young man I talked about earlier that loved cars, and if we can build on that strength, right? If we can teach him how to build race cars, if we can teach him how to fix engines, if we can teach him how to show up to a job on time, if we can teach him how to get along with his boss, if we can teach him how his skills are there and everybody says, wow, you're really good at this, then that builds strength, that builds hope, that builds self-reliance, that builds all of these things that we've talked about before when we start with the strength. If you're going to start with a deficit and just just lead with the deficit, it's really hard and it's really sad when all you look at is what's wrong with you. And quite frankly, I don't know about you guys, but I am really, really, really aware of what's wrong with me. And there are people in my life that will point it out if I'm not. So let's just move on. So, who's going to see our strengths if we're temporarily blind to them? So hopefully you'll be the person that can help people see their strengths when they're temporarily blind to them, and then give them the opportunity to assume the responsibility to fix what's wrong, to take the responsibility to take those first steps. You know, all of this requires action. It's an action item. So you've got to take that first step. You've got to take responsibility for your own wellness. Now, I can sit around and I can talk about all the horrible things that happened to me my whole life, and and your body never forgets a feeling, and trauma stays in your cellular level, and I just don't have a chance. I could do that, and I would not be having near as much fun as I am now. So we have to be able to take responsibility for our own wellness. And the scary part of that is you never know where you're going to land. It's like, you know, you don't know where it's going to go. You take that first step and you don't know where it's going to. But you do know that it's probably going to take you someplace better than you are right now, or at least someplace different. And you know that at least maybe 5 steps down the road, it'll be way different. So the problem with that is that as helpers, it's really hard to sit with somebody when they're trying on new things. Right? Like you're going, oh God, no. Seriously? She's going to try to get a job? Oh no, the last time she tried to get a job, she wound up in the hospital for 3 weeks. Right? So I had a friend who was very developmentally delayed, and God love her, she never gave up on herself. Never. And still hasn't. And she called me one day and she's like, I have an appointment at the flight school. I'm going to go enroll in school to be a stewardess. I was like, really? Okay. And off she went. And she came and she called me later. She's like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I think I weigh too much. I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe. But you know, the person, and then I called up the counselor and I'm like, thank you for being nice to my friend and not like making fun of her and throwing her out. Because they could have. Really easily. But she never gave up on herself. She completely took positive risks. She took those risks in spite of anything everybody ever said. And she's working now and she's really happy and she's doing a good job. But taking those positive risks means you might fail. That means you might experience pain. That means you might experience symptom remanifestations. You might experience anxiety. But all of those things are opportunities to learn and grow, and that's where we have to really be able to support people in taking those positive risks. These are some ways that we can embrace personal responsibility, each of us. Building our own crisis and treatment plans through the RAP plans. Really choosing our own relationships and our own spiritual practices. Creating a life of our choice, determining the potential outcome of our decisions, assessing information about medication and side effects, and having the ability to obtain all of our records. I don't know if anybody's here has ever read their records. If you ever been to a counselor and you like want to read your records, did you have like a really shot of tequila beforehand? Because I always tell people, if you're going to read your own records, do not go home alone. I mean, for at least 48 hours, make sure you've got somebody with you, because it is devastating to read what other people write about you, right? So here's what I would say. I think it's a good thing to read your records just so you can find all the mistakes. You know, no, I don't have 7 kids and was married 3 times. I have 3 kids. I was married 7 times. To get this straight, please, can we get this straight? So I think it's really important to read your records, because the truth is that your records are legal documents and they cannot be changed, but they can be amended. So you can put a note in there next to the mistake and say, here's how it really was. You can add stuff to your record. You can't take anything out, you can't change it, but you can add to it. And that's an important thing. And I also think it's really important that you have somebody with you when you're reading your records explaining to you what this means. And I also think it's really important that you have somebody with you for at least 48 hours afterwards, because if you're anything like me, it takes that long for your head to catch up with your heart. Because they weren't even my records, they were my son's records. And I was just fine at the time, and then, like, you know, as I said, about 48 hours later, I was a mess, a complete chocolate mess. And so that's just never good to do. The other thing I would say is, if you are writing records, like you're creating the documents, I get that you have to do that. I mean, that's part of your job. You have to do that. How else would you know what's happened and what can we do? So what I would suggest you do is pretend that the person is standing behind you reading the records as you're writing them. And hope that you can bring some compassion to those records. And that you can create an accurate picture of the person that is balanced of their strengths and their weaknesses and the situations that may be causing some issues right now, as opposed to overall, man, she's a mess, right? It's just not helpful. All right, it's break time.